welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Mark Simon, joined by SIS VP of Football, Matt Manocherian.
What's up, Mark?
We're splitting today's show into two segments. We're going to talk about research we've done, a little NFL playoffs and the All-Rookie Team. I suppose that's three segments. In our first segment, we're joined by research associate Stephen Polacheck. Hey, Stephen.
Hello.
Matt and Stephen have done some writing recently for Sharp Football, and Stephen, we'll start with you. Let's start with what you're working on. It's a piece about the Bengals and Titans, Saturday, 4:30 divisional playoffs. And it seems like there is a very favorable feeling around the Bengals these days, whether it be public perception or statistically as well. And we've previously identified the Titans as being an extremely soft number one from a statistical perspective. They don't even rank in the top half of the NFL in total points. Since he's won 4 of 5, the game they lost, they sat players, so they've really won 4 in a row at full strength. Let's go inside the Bengals a little bit, a deeper dive. Very basic question to start, Stephen. What can we attribute this season progression that they've had to get them to the point where we could almost say that they're a favorite against the number one seed in the AFC?
Coming into last offseason, the biggest talking point was obviously in the offensive line. Obviously, Burrow tore his ACL due to a blown block. It was a big debate come draft time whether they should draft Oregon tackle Penei Sewell or LSU wide receiver Ja'Marr Chase. Ultimately, they decided to use free agency to address the offensive line and take Ja'Marr Chase. When we're looking at points above replacement for their offensive line, pairing it to last year, Jonah Williams stayed at left tackle, but he went from a -3 points above replacement all the way up to +2. Quentin Spain, now he played only some of last season, went from a -1 to a 7, and center Trey Hopkins stayed at from 9 to 5. A bit of a decline, but still very positive. Signing Riley Reif in the offseason, they went from a -2 at right tackle all the way up to a +5. So a huge addition on that side, which was the rumored spot for Penei Sewell. And they kind of held the same at their right guard, moving from Jordan to a Hakeem Adeniji. But really the biggest difference between last year's Bengals and this year's Bengals happens to be on the defensive side of the ball. Looking at the same exact stat, points above replacement, all but the corner positions all improved upon what they were last year. So huge free agent signings in Larry Ogunjobi, Trey Hendrickson, Eli Apple, Mike Hilton, and Chidobe Awuzie all made the team better. Their defense is significantly better than it was last year.
So this sounds like executive of the year kind of stuff that I'm hearing from you.
Pretty much. They turned over a ton of the defense, and those who still stuck around all improved as well. So somebody like Sam Hubbard, he went from a 11 points above replacement all the way up to a 26. He was huge for the team this year.
And we should point out, just when we talk about points above replacement, we're not talking about total points there. We're talking about total points above and beyond what we would expect from a replacement level player that was kind of asked to do the same thing. So when you talk about these offensive linemen with just these barely positive numbers, what you're getting is this guy wasn't like less than a college football player trying to play in the NFL, which is what they were last year. So, I mean, to your point, it's been year 3 of their building plan, and the combination of the guys they brought in with the guys that got better, I think here they are.
Last year, 4 of their offensive linemen were negative. This year, only 1 of them is negative, which is the huge takeaway.
Going back to the quarterback position, because that's what public eye pays attention to, is Joe Burrow just better, or does he have more weapons?
It's a bit of both, but Burrow has absolutely been better. Looking at just completion percentage, he went up from 65 to 70%. His catchable passes made a slight bump up from 88 to 90%. His on target went from 80 to 83%. And his touchdown rate went up from 3% to a very good 6.5%. Now, some of those stats can be attributed to checking the ball down, you want to say, but his throw depth actually stayed pretty much the same, 8.5 in 2020 and 8.2 this year. So really, the bottom line is Burrow has just been better.
Stephen, I've had the opportunity to read a little bit about what you've been writing, though, and I know you've got more about why Joe Burrow has been so different this year than that I've had the privilege of reading. I hope you're not just going to save it and make everybody go to Sharp Football Analysis to read it, because you have some pretty good insight in there.
Yeah, so when the Bengals drafted Ja'Marr Chase back in May, it wasn't just the selection of Ja'Marr Chase, the player. It was also unlocking a little bit more of T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd's abilities. So what Jamar Chase has done, while being great himself, has really opened up underneath for Boyd and Higgins to play more of a role they're suited for. So to look more at numbers for that. So Jamar Chase is running 20%, just under 20% of his routes as just go routes, and where he's been able to torch teams in getting about 300 yards and 4 touchdowns off of those. The defenders have to respect that. So when Chase is running these go routes, T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd are able to run much more crossing routes that run parallel to the line of scrimmage. And while they're running just about the same amount of them as they did in previous years, they're getting targeted at a way higher rate. So, for example, Higgins...
Chase is changing the shape of the defense, basically, right? They're running the same stuff, but now these guys all of a sudden are just way more efficient in terms of on those short and intermediate routes.
Yeah, pretty much exactly that, because Chase is going over the top and pulling attention away from those two. They're able to just come across the field where there is nobody. So Boyd is running just as many slants as he did. He's getting targeted less, but that's also because Jamar Chase is taking a lot of that slant work and just dominating from there. And because Chase's deep ball is so, I want to say, opposing to defenses, they have to play behind him. They can't jump that slant. So he's taking those he's got about 175 yards just after the catch on said slant routes.
Right. So it's like they had a number 1 and a number 2 receiver. And it's not just that they added a number 1. And so that 1 and 2 that they had became the number 2 and the number 3, but also literally his taking the top off the defense, his skill set. It's the perfect match with those guys. And obviously with Burrow, as we've seen from, what did you say? From the Bayou Bengal to the Cincinnati Bengals.
Exactly.
So how does all this match up with Tennessee?
I think the most interesting thing to look at is obviously Tennessee is getting Derrick Henry back. So where I talked about how great the Bengals have reinvented their defense, Tennessee is getting their number 1 weapon back. And that's not a slight against A.J. Brown. Derrick Henry has been facing stack boxes a good amount of the season. We'll see what this new look Bengals defense can do against Derrick Henry. They haven't really faced a elite running back in their recent run of games. So it's kind of untested waters. And I kind of want to see exactly what I just talked about with Chase, Higgins, and Boyd. Watch for Chase to go deep and watch for Higgins and Boyd to run shorter and just try and press that Tennessee secondary.
Yeah, it's a tricky matchup here, right? Both of these teams are kind of vulnerable in different ways to each other. We talked about the firepower that the Bengals have. Obviously, they have the better quarterback in this game. And I think that anytime you go into a playoff game with the better quarterback, you feel pretty good about that, even if you're on the road against a team that's coming off the bye. But this is all about, what are the Titans going to be with Derrick Henry back on the field? They've kind of figured it out. They managed to find their way into the 1 seed despite losing him. But Ryan Tannehill has not been an efficient quarterback since Derrick Henry went down. So which Derrick Henry do we get when he comes back, and which Ryan Tannehill do we get? I think is going to play a big part into this one. But from the Bengals' perspective, having made the choice to go with Jamar Chase and clearly being correct about that, you got to still be a bit concerned playing against this team that's really good up front. You're talking about a physical, nasty team on both sides of the ball. That's going to be the challenge for the Bengals. So they're going to have to go back to everything you talked about, Steven, getting those short routes going, getting the ball out of Joe Burrow's hands quickly. Because if he's trying to stay back there and they're kind of imbalanced in what they're doing offensively, then that'll play right into what Mike Vrabel wants to do.
Alex Vigerman's win probability models like the Bengals a lot in this game, so that will be certainly an interesting watch. So now we're going to move to our second segment, which is with Matt Manocherian, our VP of football, who wrote a piece about pressures above expectations and leaders for 2021. This is something that we talked about with Bryce Rossler earlier this season. We wanted to kind of put a final stamp on it for the regular season for this year. Just to refresh, we do track pressures here at SIS. There are other companies that track pressures too. We track them using our methods, part of what Video Scouts do. We also have a calculation for expected pressures. Now, these are pressures where you're using a series of inputs for every play, something like the quarterback's drop type, down and distance, score, whether a play action was used, and how the defender was aligned. So on one play, you might have a very low probability of getting a pressure. On another play, you might have a very high probability of getting a pressure based on the circumstances surrounding that play. And again, looking at it from the perspective of the average player. Over the course of the season, we take all the plays, we sum up your expected pressures, and we get a number. And then we compare that to what your actual number was. Using Aaron Donald as an example, Aaron Donald had 56 pressures on what we call qualifying snaps in 2021. Those are the snaps that meet a certain criteria. We weed certain plays out. On those plays, Aaron Donald was expected to have 41 pressures. So he had 15 more. He had 56 compared to 41. He was 15 above expectation. That's a good number, but there's a number here that blows me away, and this is what we're going to talk about with Matt. Cowboys rookie Micah Parsons had 27 expected pressures, and Micah Parsons had 22 more than expected, and did that in a much smaller number of plays than Aaron Donald and some of the other players that are essentially on the leaderboard. He had a crazy pressure rate. Matt, can you explain his dominance?
Yeah, I mean, pressures above expectation is awesome because it allows us to put the context of kind of how you're used and all of that into that. And when you look at just the rate basis of Micah Parsons, because he's not rushing on every play, it's just absolutely ridiculous. He blows everybody away. We're talking about half as many relevant pass rush snaps as other guys on the top 10 of the list. He's the second place rate in pressure rate above expectation, right? If you look at it on a rate basis, second place would be 6% above expectation. He's up at 9% above expectation, right? He's 150% of what the second and third place guys are doing. So there are a lot of players in the league that would be happy with just a raw pressure rate of 9%. He's 9% above expected. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
So there was one other player with more pressures above expectation than Parsons, but it was more snaps. But we should still give him his due. Jonathan Allen of the Washington football team just edged him out. Allen's a defensive tackle. Parsons is a hybrid. It's a little bit of a different situation here. Matt, what would you say about his season?
Yeah, nobody punched above his stat line better than Jonathan Allen. And I love that this metric allows us to do what we were just saying, comparing these pass rushers across alignments, right? So for Jonathan Allen, he had about 150 more snaps than Parsons, right? A lot more opportunities to get pressures. However, he actually had fewer expected pressures than Parsons, mostly because he's an interior player and Parsons is either blitzing or coming off the edge in situations where you're much more likely to get a pressure to begin with. So it's a cool strength of this statistic that you're able to compare those things. And when you actually look at it, yeah, in terms of the expected pressures, Jonathan Allen was at 25 and he had 23 pressures above expectation. So that raw total, the highest in the league, yeah, it has to do with the play count a little bit, but you could argue that it's even more impressive than what Micah Parsons accomplished because the expected pressure rate that Jonathan Allen had coming to him was so low. And not to mention, he lost a couple of teammates to injuries as the SIS injury risk models correctly, but sadly kind of were correct about Chase Young and Montez Sweat.
So we identified two guys with Allen and Parsons, but I feel like you could pick those guys out somewhat. Can you identify someone who had a better season than maybe he was given credit for based on this stat?
Yeah, it's hard to get things by NFL fans, but I think one name, going back to the Bengals talk earlier, that I don't know if he gets the level of love that you'd expect is Trey Hendrickson. Over the course of the year, he had 37 expected pressures and was 15 pressures above expectation. So that same PAA number that we were talking about with Aaron Donald there. I don't think he's obviously mentioned in the same sentences as Donald often, nor should he be. But Hendrickson was really good this year. Remember, this is somebody that was signed from the Saints coming off a 13 and a half season, which was, 7 more sacks than he had in the entire career combined to that point. So kind of seeming like a one-hit wonder last year, not the greatest season in terms of total points. And then he comes into the Bengals and he proved that it was not a one-hit wonder. 14 sacks this year, but the 71 total pressures. And like we mentioned before, the pressures above expectation, 39 total points saved. This is a legit defensive end in the NFL. This is a legit pass rusher who is a force to be reckoned with. And was not a one-season wonder as it might have seemed like coming into 2021.
And besides Aaron Donald, who are some of the mega guys?
Yeah, they won't surprise you at all. TJ Watt is right up there at the top of the list with Parsons and Allen. And for a guy that tied the sack record, no surprise there. Chris Jones, who we talked about a ton on this podcast, he was playing outside earlier in the year, ended up moving inside, had good production in both places, but especially on the interiors where he stands out above expectation. And then, we talked about Aaron Donald, throw Myles Garrett on the list, and Matt Judon, a guy who was strong offseason signing last year on the heels of a good PAE season. And again, really performed well in terms of pressures above expectation for the Patriots this time.
To segue into our final segment, which will be with John Todd talking about the all-rookie first teams, we want to talk and we want to reiterate something that we brought up in weeks past, talking about the SIS football rookie website coming soon. Matt, what's impressed you about what we're putting together so far?
I know from a basic level, books are cool, but websites are better. It's a lot more flexibility in terms of what we're able to accomplish. So I'm really, really pumped about how the planning is coming along on the NFL draft website that we're putting together to replace the football rookie handbook. So there will be no paper this year. It'll all be online, but it's going to be a sweet website. We have just a whole new product development process that we have in place. We have the ability to create things in the way that we didn't have them before. And we're going to be bringing a lot of cool new functionality, a lot of the same stats that you love from the football rookie handbook, a lot of the same information that we talk about right here on the show. But now it's going to be a nice, clean website form where you're going to be able to access it and click around from leaderboard to leaderboard, from player to player, and really just enjoy that whole universe without having to carry that 700-page book around.
And without having to thumb from one random page to another random page, certainly. Plus a big board, right?
Oh, yeah. And the big board's going to be very, very cool. There's going to be functionality to filter by position. There's going to be overall rankings. We're going to get into more of the glossary side of things so that when you're confused about what we're talking about, when we're mentioning something like first step get off or any of the concepts that might trip up a reader that hasn't worked for an NFL team before, that's all going to be there right for you with tool tips and stuff of that sort. Speaking of sorting, there's going to be sortable leaderboards. It's going to be really cool. It's going to be very different than from a technological standpoint, what the book was able to do.
And the last word on the website, free. We bring in John Todd, one of our football rookie handbook website gurus. John and Nathan Cooper just picked the 2021 SIS All-Rookie Team for 2021. They did this in an article on the Sports Info Solutions website. You can go to sportsinfosolutions.com. It's on the right side of the page, big. You can see it there. I'm not going to go through every pick. I will read the first team selections, and then John and I and Matt will talk about them. We'll start with the offense. Quarterback, Mac Jones from the Patriots. Running backs are Javonte Williams and Najee Harris from the Broncos and Steelers, respectively. Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamar Chase, the wide receivers. Some questions there from, I guess what you would call the Twitterati about those selections, but total points justify that. Kyle Pitts, the tight end, certainly a favorite of SIS dating back to the football rookie handbook. The tackles are Rashawn Slater and Penei Sewell from the Chargers and Lions, respectively. The guards, Trey Smith and Landon Dickerson. And the center from the Kansas City Chiefs, along with Trey Smith from the Chiefs, is Creed Humphrey, who was also written up very favorably in the football rookie handbook. And we should mention, too, the kicker, Evan McPherson from the Cincinnati Bengals. We're going to talk about a couple of things here. We'll start with Javonte Williams. He had strong success this season in a running by committee approach. Let's look at him. I know he was someone that you guys loved last year coming out of the college ranks. What was the key to his season this year, John?
Yeah, a huge fan of Javonte Williams coming out of the draft last year. And there's so many eerie similarities between his college career and his rookie season. Some of these are just staggering to me. The last 2 years at UNC, he was in an even backfield committee with Jets rookie Michael Carter, who was actually on our second team for running backs this season. So over those 2 seasons, his last 2 seasons in college, their carries were split between the two of them, 333 to 324. Very even there, 2,248 yards. And 2,073 yards. So last season alone, their attempts were 156 to 157, separated by 100 yards. Very even timeshare committee between the two of them. So then he gets drafted by Denver into a timeshare with Melvin Gordon, and again split everything absolutely perfectly. Both players had exactly 203 attempts, 903, 918 yards. So again, the timeshare thing has just been a thing for him for 3 straight years now. Another stat, Williams led all of college football in broken tackles last season and his last 2 years combined, if you combine those 2 seasons. So they entered the league, maybe wonder if that size and physicality would hold up against professionals, still led all the NFL in that same stat this year. Again, these past 3 years, he hasn't been a feature back doing this. He's not leading college football or the NFL as a feature running back. He's in a timeshare, and he's still leading everyone at these levels in broken tackles. So he was 6th in yards after contact this year. He had the 13th most catches among running backs. His pass protection skills were what led him to see the field so early. That was a staple of his and let him gain the trust of his team as a rookie. So all three phases there, running the ball, catching the ball, pass protecting, extremely well-rounded back. And the most exciting part is that Melvin Gordon's contract's expiring. So for the first time since maybe high school, he might be poised to be the guy entering 2022 if you're a fantasy guy out there or something.
And we'll see if he's equipped to handle the workload that would entail. If you're curious about the wide receiver selections, you can read the article that John and Nathan wrote. You can follow along on Twitter, SportsInfoSIS. We have the other thing to talk about with the offense is the offensive line. I mentioned the tackles, Rashawn Slater, Penei Sewell, the guards, Trey Smith, Landon Dickerson, and Creed Humphrey, the center. The success of this offensive line class, all five of the first teamers were very strong selections. What were your overall impressions of them?
Yeah, fantastic class. All five of them had at least 29 total points. And then you add Royce Newman on our second team, also had 29 total points. So the two tackles you mentioned were the first two taken last April. Obviously, very hyped players. They lived up to it. Honestly, Rashawn Slater was in the mix for Offensive Rookie of the Year for us. He stacks up as good or better than any left tackle in the league this year, protected the blind side for Justin Herbert, who was our number one player in total points this season. Then two of the first three centers in last year's Football Rookie Handbook made the first team in Humphrey and Dickerson. Dickerson played guard for the Eagles this season. And the third center, Josh Myers, was third in total points for rookie centers, just been dealing with a knee injury for a while. It sounds like he might make it back for the playoffs here soon. But let's focus on the Chiefs specifically. We all saw the Super Bowl last year, the disaster they had up front, pass protecting for Patrick Mahomes. Offense line really isn't a position historically where you can try to a complete overhaul, see immediate results, things like chemistry, communication, cohesion. It's hard to build all of that in one offseason. And it's a position group that really needs those things. That's kind of a staple of that position more than anything. But they definitely did through free agency. Joe Thuney traded for Orlando Brown. Then they drafted Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith up front. At center and guard, they led all rookie guards and centers in total points at each spot. They both played over 1,100 snaps, which only 10 offense linemen in the NFL can say this year. Joe Thuney's actually another one. And then Orlando Brown actually had 1050. So that's where that cohesion was built. Those four guys played over 1,000 snaps together. And they helped drop Patrick Mahomes' pressure rate by over 5% from 2020. So it's crazy to have a whole new cast up front, trusted to protect a superstar like Mahomes for a Super Bowl contender, but I'm really not sure it could have worked out much better for them.
So what you're saying from that is he's not going to be running around like crazy in the Super Bowl this year, right?
That's the idea. We'll see. But no, it's amazing how much that was such a need. You saw what they did. They just overhauled the whole thing. And like I said, that cohesion is tough to build. But when you have four guys playing 1,000 snaps together, they put it together pretty quick.
They'll definitely have their hands full this weekend going against the Bills. When you look at what the Bills bring to the table up front, they are a load for everybody to handle from an offensive line standpoint. So, the tests are going to become, and until they do it in the playoffs, you know how that evaluation is going to go. It takes one bad game and all of a sudden, who are these two rookies that you're rolling out here?
We mentioned good executive maneuvers by the Bengals, good executiving by the Chiefs as well. And certainly it all comes together there. The scouting, the choices, all of that worked out well for Kansas City this year. Let's move to the defense, and we'll run through the names again here. Should mention that we had one hybrid position selection among them, but the interior defensive linemen, we start with the Cowboys and the Patriots. Osa Odighizuwa up front with Christian Barmore, and then the edges, Greg Rousseau and Odafe Owe of the Ravens. Then an edge linebacker had to put Micah Parsons kind of into his own class there. He was the number one rookie on the defensive side. Linebackers, Ernest Jones from the Rams, Nick Bolton from the Chiefs. Our four defensive backs, Pat Surtain II, Ahsante Samuel Jr., a lot of NFL legacy there, Eric Stokes and Javon Holland. And then by default, there's only one punter to pick from, Presley Harvin III from the Pittsburgh Steelers. So let's talk about the defense a little bit. And you wanted to talk up front first, and that was with the interior defensive lineman and Christian Barmore.
Yeah, Christian Barmore for the Patriots, our number one rated defensive tackle in the handbook last year. First defensive tackle taken in the draft. Bill Belichick defense, coming from a Nick Saban defense. Thought there was a great match to be made there. At Alabama, he was really a passing down only player until the back half of his last season in college. And that's still mostly how he was used for the Patriots. He led the team in total pass rush attempts, finished second on the team in total pressures, which tells a lot better picture than his 1.5 sack tally this year. You see 1.5 sacks, you don't think too much of it, but second on the team in pressures, had a good year as a pass rusher. Pass rush data is there. You look at all NFL defensive tackles that had at least 30 pressures this season, he was top 10 in pressure rate. So again, the pass rush production's there. That's been his background. He was clearly used in that role for two great coaches. So the production was there moving forward to the NFL. But then you look and see that on less than 200 run play snaps for him this season, he still led all NFL defensive tackles and holding penalties drawn on run plays, 45 combined tackles, some solid numbers there. Played around 60% of snaps this season in all 17 games. He's still very young, but that's a great rookie season to build off of.
And we talked about, on the offensive side, the offensive line as a group being very strong. On the defensive side, I feel like we knew this going into the draft. The cornerback class was really good. 6 rookie cornerbacks very strong this year. We mentioned the 4 on the first team. There's a couple on the second team as well. Run through your thoughts on them.
Awesome rookie cornerback class. So good that we had to tweak our positions to get the best group represented. Had to go to an ambiguous defensive back reclassification there to get all 6 of these guys represented. 6 rookie cornerbacks that had at least 30 total points this season, led by Patrick Surtain with 53, second to only Micah Parsons among rookie defenders. Splitting the first and second team groups was maybe the hardest of the decisions we had to make. You got guys like Paulson Adebo, Tyson Campbell, Marco Wilson were all first team worthy on our second team, especially in any other year. But you look at Surtain and Eric Stokes were 2 of the 10 most targeted cornerbacks in the NFL this season. They each responded with 12 passes defensed and only 3 touchdowns allowed. Really good numbers, especially for the volume that they saw. Then you have Ahsante Samuel, who was looking like defensive rookie of the year through the first month of the season. Rookie of the week twice in September. I remember mentioning in the podcast way back in September some ridiculous numbers that he was putting up for targets and 0 completions allowed for a few weeks and everything. Tailed off a bit down the stretch, but that crazy fast start led quarterbacks to avoid him more. And he saw just about half the number of targets that Stokes did. I think that correlates there. So quarterbacks from targeting those 3 had traditional QB ratings of 64, 68, 67, and 78. So really good stuff from those guys. Definitely first team worthy. Really, really good cornerback class as a whole coming in this year.
Yeah, John, I think we knew that there were some really good players in last year's draft, but it was so much of the conversation kept going back to the quarterbacks. Everybody who was like in that top 10 discussion that wasn't a quarterback seems like they're just absolute home runs. Such good picks. You know, it's easy to see Micah Parsons, 68 total points, just way out in front of everybody else. But Patrick Surtain II, 53 total points. That is a lot. So he was just as good as Bill. And then you think about J.C. Horn, who was playing great before he got hurt as well. So, I mean, not even including, I think the first one drafted, right? Horn was the first off the board.
One pick.
So, I mean, for all of that talent to be there, I think it really says something. And then just looking ahead at the first team defense, I'm looking at guys like Greg Rousseau. I'm looking at guys like Javon Holland. These are young rookies, right? These are guys with like 2 years of college football experience that came right out 3 years from high school, I think each of them. So, I mean, where these guys can go in terms of their careers, I think the upside is just tremendous.
So just to take total points one step further. So Surtain had 53, Parsons had 68. So on a per week basis, that's 3 to 4 per game. Like, how should we process that in our heads in terms of what their defensive impact is? Let's do that for Surtain. I think we can see pretty strongly what Parsons' impact is.
Total points is exactly what it sounds like. Total points is the number of points that you mean towards your team in terms of winning and losing, right? We're all a little bit more comfortable going from yards to expected points added a couple of years ago when everybody didn't know what expected points added was. Now, if we start thinking about that and we start about dividing it up, we're talking about how many points he was worth to his team.
So we'll close. This is a little bit of a horn toot. If you look at the composition of the teams that we created, particularly the first team, it looks like, if you go back to the Football Rookie Handbook, and this is a shameless plug for what we're going to do this coming year, it looks like we do pretty well. Just give us a little self-evaluation here.
Yeah, proud of our grades this year. Vibed with the league for where these guys were taken, and we're looking like we got a lot of these projections off on the right foot. If you take who ended up on our first team selections here, minus the specialists, we don't grade the specialists. Ernest Jones of the Rams is the only player who didn't receive a 6.4 grade or higher from us last season, which is typically a low-end starting level player by year 2. The 2021 Rookie Handbook got it right for a lot of these players. In fact, on each side of the ball for the first team of 22, we had 8 of the 11 players on offense, 8 of the 11 players on defense with 6.7 grades or higher, which are solid long-term starters. So really pleased with the guys that we saw at the top of the class, showing that in year 1, expecting that to move forward towards year 2, become solid starters. A couple other random notes. The Steelers led the way with 6 total players selected, 2 first team and 4 second team players. All but 8 NFL teams were represented across both groups. So some fun stuff to look at. It was a fun project to put together again this year.
Lions did well as well with 4 selections, so maybe their future looking a little brighter than their present. John Todd, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So if you want to see the second team and read more about the justifications for each pick from John Todd and Nathan Cooper, you can go to sportsinfosolutions.com, check out their article. This wraps up our show for this week. Thanks to Matt Manocherian, Stephen Polacheck, John Todd, and our producer, Justin Stein. I'm Mark Simon. Thank you for listening to the Off the Charts Football Podcast.